Good morning again, Hope Lutheran Church. Pastor Dan here with the continuation of our lectures on biblical history, or more specifically, the history of Israel, with a focus on the characters that make up that history as we have it in the narrative of the Old and New Testaments, otherwise known as the Bible. You will remember last time we left off with Abraham, and it occurred to me that there's one aspect of this story that I didn't do enough of previously, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we need to talk a little bit about geography in order to understand the story of the Bible. You need to know something about the geographical area that we're talking about. Now, for the vast majority of the time, we're going to be in the area that I'm going to refer to as the Holy Land. It has variously been named as Palestine, Israel. For a while, there were two kingdoms, Israel to the north, Judah to the south. It depends on the time period that you're in as to how you're going to refer to that area. But for simplicity, I'm simply going to call it the Holy Land. But before we get to that, I want to clarify just a little bit the area that is involved in the life of Abraham. Of course, it's only mentioned briefly, but this is a very important part of the ancient world because it is the area where civilization, really, as we know it, was born. It's called the Fertile Crescent. You'll remember that Abraham came from a place called Ur of the Chaldees. Now, if you can find a map somewhere that includes present-day Kuwait, which is right on the Persian Gulf, the northern part of the Persian Gulf, Ur of the Chaldees is to the northwest of present-day Kuwait, along the Euphrates River. Now, if you follow the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, they flow northwest, and they go up to what is now eastern Turkey, and they end up there. But that isn't where the Fertile Crescent ends. That's the main part of it, okay? So that whole valley, the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley, is well watered. It has rich soil. It was a place where people could farm, raise livestock. It was surrounded by a desert otherwise. So this was the area where people were settled. Now, Abraham's father travels from Ur of the Chaldees up to a place called Haran, which is up in the northern part of the Fertile Crescent, in what is present-day eastern Turkey. And then if you turn to the southwest, toward the Mediterranean coast, okay, from where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers end, you turn south there, and you follow along the coastline. from what is now parts of western Syria and Lebanon and Israel and the West Bank. That area along the coast is called the Levant, Levant. That also is part of the Fertile Crescent, okay? And it's a narrow strip of land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River Valley to the east. So that is a very narrow strip of land. The Holy Land is the area that is encompassed from just north of the Sea of Galilee there, all the way to the south. The desert in the south is called the Negev, and it goes all the way down to a place called Eilat, which ends there at the sea. So that's where we're going to be. Getting back to Abraham, then you would start at Ur. You'd go up to Haran. Then Abraham's father dies. He receives the call to go to the land that God will show him, and that's when he ends up in what we're calling the Holy Land. Now, I want to do a little geographical description of what we call the Holy Land before we get into the life of Abraham in detail. Okay, so this area to the north, there's, for the sake of simplicity, once again, let's use the terminology that is currently in use and that was also in use during New Testament times and part of Old Testament times as well. There's three sections to this strip of land. The northern part is Galilee, and Galilee has three sections to it as well. There's southern Galilee, there is the area around the Sea of Galilee, and then there is northern Galilee. The reason they divide that up into three sections is because there are microclimates here. In the southern part is anywhere from maybe 1,000 to 1,500 feet above sea level. The area around the Sea of Galilee is actually below sea level, not by much, but by about 600 feet. And then to the north, all the way up to Mount Hermon, you get way above sea level. And that, of course, is the source of the Jordan River. So that averages maybe 25 to 3,000 feet above sea level, except for the Mount of Hermon, which is much higher than that. I've forgotten now exactly how high it is. Okay, so that's the northern part. In the center is Samaria. And that encompasses from south of the Jezreel Valley, which is in the south of Galilee, down to just north of Jerusalem. If you could see the settlement of Bethel, that is the first place Abraham goes to and builds an altar to God. And that is due west, almost due west of Jericho, which is down in the Jordan River Valley. Okay, so at that point, you cross over into what is referred to as Judah. And Now, there again, you have some differences in climate. Samaria has much more rainfall, as does Galilee. Galilee has the most. Samaria also is well watered, so this is good farmland and a good land for raising livestock. For that and other reasons, of course, when we get further along here, we will find that the northern kingdom of Israel is actually much more prosperous than was the southern kingdom of Judah. Because when you get to the section of Judah, which is from just south of Bethel and all the way down through the Negev desert, that is mostly desert. Okay, now moving from east to west, along the Mediterranean Sea, that is called the coastal plain. It's flat. It's semi-tropical, and the southern part, where you see Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, that's where the Philistines lived. That's the land of the Philistines. Okay, and so going east from there all the way to the Dead Sea, you've got mostly desert. When you get to the Dead Sea, you get to the area of the planet that is the furthest below sea level on the surface of the earth. That is the Great Rift Valley, and the Jordan River flows south from Galilee down into the Dead Sea, which is dead because it's salty. It has a lot of minerals, and nothing can live in the Dead Sea. So there it is. East of there, of course, is modern day Jordan. In the middle, which includes Judah and Samaria and all the way up to Galilee, is what is referred to as the hill country. It is very hilly. The hills aren't all that high, but they're high enough so that this is not a tropical climate. But they do have several growing seasons, so it's not, you don't get a lot of snow. It can snow. I've been in Jerusalem when it snowed. It doesn't last very long, but it can snow. But when you get up to the Sea of Galilee, that's actually almost tropical. At the present time, there's large banana groves and obviously citrus. You can grow anything up there. That is a very mild climate, the region around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so what you have then is the coastal plain along the Mediterranean coast, in the middle, the hill country, and then at the far eastern end, you have the Jordan River Valley, which is a deep valley. The Jordan River flows through it, and the deepest part of that is the area around the Dead Sea. Further to the south is desert. Around the Dead Sea, they get maybe an inch or two of rain a year. That's about it. But up in the Galilee region, they can get up to 30 inches of rain, I believe, in a good year. Although, like California, it can vary from year to year. There are years of drought and there are years of plenty. So that, in a nutshell, is the geography of the region. Try to remember those highlights because we will be referring to them again and again as we go along here. So you will recall that we ended with Abraham arriving in Canaan. At this time, what I'm calling the Holy Land is Canaan. And he builds an altar to God at Bethel. And there is a drought going on. Now, when there was a drought in the area, people traveled south. Why did they go south? Because Egypt is to the south, and Egypt has a very famous river, the Nile River. And because it has the Nile River, it has water. And in times of drought, even in times of drought, there is the ability to produce food in Egypt. So south, Abraham and his clan go to look for food. But Abraham, remember, what he's doing, he's traveling because God gave him this promise. And it's a story of faith. It's a story of how Abraham is called to live by faith in this threefold promise that he would be the ancestor of a great nation, that they would inherit this land, and that through him all the peoples of the earth would be blessed. So this is a story that involves eventually all the peoples of the earth, not just this one chosen group of people, but all people. Okay, so it's a promise that historically, eventually, is to include everyone once the promise is fulfilled. So Abraham is called to put his faith in this promise. And the first thing required of him is to go to the land that God shows him. There he goes. Now he's in Egypt looking for food. And already Abraham is, his faith is challenged because his wife Sarah apparently is a very beautiful woman, and he is afraid that Pharaoh will want her to be a part of his harem. So he tells his wife Sarah, "Tell the Pharaoh that you are my sister, not my wife, so it goes well with me, so he doesn't kill me in order to get you." Pharaoh likes that. And he likes it so much that he decides to take Sarah into his harem. So temporarily, Sarah becomes a part of the harem of the Pharaoh in Egypt. And on top of that, the Pharaoh heaps all kinds of riches on Abraham. So Abraham becomes an even more wealthy person than he was before he traveled to Egypt. Obviously, when people lose their faith in the Bible, there's always a mess. And God has to clean up the mess, okay? So there's a mess here. This isn't going to work if Sarah remains the wife of Pharaoh. None of these promises are going to come into being. So to make a long story short, Pharaoh figures it out, okay? This is not Abraham's sister. This is his wife. He gets highly irritated at Abraham, but Abraham, nevertheless, is very fortunate because the Pharaoh lets him go. And he even lets him keep all of those riches he gave him. So Abraham leaves Egypt after this lapse in his faith, a richer man than he was when he had first arrived. So back up to the Holy Land they go. Abraham and his entire entourage, which, as you might remember, includes his nephew Lot. Now, Lot has his own herds. Okay, so Lot isn't just dependent on Abraham, he's got his own livestock. So now the two of them, between the two of them, there is so much livestock that they're going to need to split up because there's just too many for one area. Okay, so they need to split up. So Abraham gives Lot a choice. He says, Lot, you can go, to the right, and if you do that, I'll go to the left. Or if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. So he gives Lot the choice. Lot looks around, and they are in the hill country. They are west of the area of the Dead Sea. There are two cities that are in existence at the time there. Sodom and Gomorrah are the name of those cities. And beyond there is rich farmland. So Lot decides that he's going to take that choice land. If he's got a choice, he's going to take the best one. So off he goes to that area, which is presently in Jordan. And Abraham then remains in the hill country there in the Holy Land. Okay, at this point, I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 15, if you have your Bibles in front of you, because in chapter 15, we have the next major, shall we say, crisis in faith for Abraham. Sarah was said to be barren. That is to say, she is infertile and biologically unable to have children. Abraham and Sarah at this point are growing older. On top of that, so it doesn't look too good when it comes to the prospect of having children. In the Bible, this is not necessarily to be understood as a problem. Children of promise are usually conceived miraculously. I would refer you, for example, to Samuel, who was born to a woman who was also said to be barren. I would refer you to Rebecca, who was also said to be barren. I would refer you to Rachel, who was also said to be unable to have children. And of course, this is not even to mention the Virgin Mary. So when it comes to children of promise, because these are children that are a part of the story of salvation chosen by God as instruments in the story of salvation, these are children of promise and they are gifts of God. That is really the point here. But in any case, Abraham understands biology well enough to know that the two of them are not going to be able to have a child in the normal way that people have children. So he complains to God. And he says, "Oh God, I don't have an heir. And my heir is going to be this guy Eleazar." Something to do with the legal situation at the time, that Abraham's, I don't remember whether it was the idea that Eleazar was, because he was Abraham's servant, that he would be heir to Abraham's property after he died, childless. But in any case, Abraham is afraid that there isn't going to be a child. So how does God respond to Abraham's lapse in faith? Well, he says, "Abraham, come on out of your tent, look up to the sky, count the stars if you can." Well, that's not possible. And then God says, "So are the number of descendants that you are going to have, as many stars as there are up there in the sky." So what God does is simply restate the promise using this visual aid of the stars. And when Abraham hears the promise from God, hears the promise spoken to him, as in, recall what the Apostle Paul told the Galatians when he was talking about where faith comes from. Faith comes from hearing. Abraham heard the promise, and the text says he believed it. And because he believed the promise, God reckoned it to him as righteousness. That is to say, because Abraham believed God's promise, he was considered a righteous person. This is an important concept, an important biblical concept, and will become very important when we get to the New Testament, in particular, Paul's theology. The idea here is that what makes a person righteous is a right relationship with God, and what makes a right relationship with God isn't just following the proper moral code. A right relationship with God is one wherein you believe in God's promises and you act accordingly. The choices you make in life, which in many cases, when you make choices based on a promise from God, you are going to be taking risks. And this whole life that Abraham has chosen to follow God because of this promise, down to this new land, to give up his entire past, to embrace a new future. This is a big risk. He doesn't know if it's going to work out in advance. The only thing he has is a promise from God. And the only means he has of determining whether or not he's going to do what God says is whether or not he believes it. So sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. In other words, Abraham is a lot like you and a lot like me. Sometimes we believe it, sometimes we don't. That's just the way it is. When it comes to believing God's promises, because those promises involve acts of God, because those promises involve things that are beyond our ability to understand, oftentimes we are called upon to believe things that the human mind simply cannot get itself around. It cannot understand it. It isn't possible for us to comprehend it. So it's purely a matter of being willing to take the risk of faith that God will do what God says God will do. That's what faith is. And God will always require that you put your own skin in the game. This is not just a matter of some passive belief that is simple and easy and doesn't require anything of you. To believe in God's promises means making choices that will put you at risk. And in the case of Abraham, his entire life is at risk in this, in the entire biblical story. Those who follow God put their entire lives in his hands, because when he calls them to follow, and then at that point they belong to God, and they go wherever God leads. And that includes the disciples of Jesus Christ. Recall the stories of the Gospels. What happens? Jesus walks along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He sees a couple of fishermen. He says, "Follow me." They follow him. And that's the end of their old life and the beginning of a new one. And so it goes. So chapter 15 is an important chapter in this sense, because it is in this chapter that the statement that God considers a person righteous on the basis of their faith in his promise, that's where it is clearly stated. Okay, we're just about out of time, but before I end this, I do want to make reference, because next time I want to get into the next part of the story of Abraham, which involves Sarah's servant girl, Hagar. Because while Abraham believes God's promise, Sarah isn't there yet, okay? She's just not there. And so she loses patience, and she tells Abraham, "Look, I'm not going to give you a child." So according to custom at the time, if a man's wife couldn't give him an heir, a child, then the woman's maid would be given to the husband, and the child born from that union would become the heir of the person. So Sarah tells Abraham to have a child with Hagar. Excuse me. And apparently Abraham's faith is not entirely healthy at this point yet either, because he goes along with it. So and they have a child. The child's name is Ishmael. In Hebrew, names always mean something. Ishmael means God hears, okay? And so now Abraham's firstborn child is not the child of his wife Sarah. It's the child of Sarah's handmaid, Hagar. And Ishmael, rightly, is the heir of Abraham at this point. Okay, so So we've got a problem on our hands here. Once again, a complicated problem. What's going to happen to Hagar and Ishmael, especially when eventually, as we all know, Abraham and Sarah will eventually have a child. His name will be Isaac, which means laughter, appropriately. What's going to happen to Hagar and Ishmael? And how is God going to treat them? I mean, it's not like it's their fault that Abraham and Sarah lost their nerve again. What's going to happen to them? And who will the people that come from Hagar and Ishmael turn out to be? Well, that'll be the subject of our next lecture. And I'm hoping to start to move along a little bit quicker starting next. I know I keep saying that, and one of these days I'll get around to it. But in any case, in the meantime, I hope, again, you all are doing well. And I'm looking forward to the day when we can meet once again in our own room here at Hope Lutheran Church. And we don't have to do this using my cell phone, which is not something I am particularly fond of. But in the meantime, take care, everyone, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.